Today we're going to talk about current events, what's going on in the news, and some important issues. And we're going to kick it off with one of the what I think are the most atrocious things the U.S. government has done in a while, and that's imposed U.S. government sanctions on the judge Kimberly Prost of Canada, as well as three other ICC judges. That was Nicolas Guillot of France, excuse the pronunciation, Nazet Shamim Khan of Fiji, and Mam Madaya Niang of Senegal. But so let's talk a little bit about that, Fareed.
Well, I think we have to note that the United States is not a party to the Rome Statute, so it does not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Additionally, I think these judges are directly involved in the case against Benjamin Netanyahu and I forget the former defense minister, for which the ICC had issued arrest warrants in relation to genocidal crimes committed in Gaza. And when that announcement came out, the United States made it very clear that it would sanction the ICC. I think it also sanctioned the chief prosecutor of the ICC and other officials at the ICC, along with these judges. So basically, it's like a mafia boss saying to the head of a court that's investigating crimes against an ally, "Hey, you know what? You're on our hit list if you decide to go ahead with this prosecution."
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, the U.S. is acting like a mafia thug in the way they have reacted to these arrest warrants and the ICC investigation into Israeli crimes committed in Gaza.
It'd be good to talk about the history of the ICC a little bit. ICC stands for the International Criminal Court, and it was formed in 1998 under something called the Rome Statute. And over 140 countries signed it, and Canada was one that signed it, and we implemented legislation shortly thereafter in 2000, I believe. So very quickly, almost not quite the first, but one of the first countries to implement legislation in their own country, which is required to authorize, or what's the term, to formalize the
Ratify.
yes, ratify the statute in the country. And a number of countries actually signed, but then sort of did not ratify. U.S. actually signed. Russia, Israel, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen are countries that signed, but then didn't ratify, did nothing on it. And the United States never had any intent to ratify it, as Clinton was the one who signed it, or not Clinton himself, but his representative signed it in 98, but then he recommended that it not be ratified. And then George W. Bush revoked that signature, which you can't really revoke, but basically said they had no intent of proceeding with that, ratifying that, which is, and like your statement there about them being a thug, basically they don't want to be prosecuted for stuff they're doing in other countries, which breaches, either genocide or humanitarian rights, which there's things such as torture. So they basically want to be above the law, which is interesting for a country that claims they want to support law and order and rule of law, etc. That they want their own military and their own officials to be above the law in the world.
Yeah, and I think there's a big fear that if they had ratified the Rome Statute,
yeah,
that they would then be prosecuted for war crimes committed in the Iraq War, not just what was happening on the ground, but officials from the Bush administration, including George W. Bush himself, being prosecuted for the war crimes that happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, their summary executions through their the CIA drone program, which killed over 25,000 people, the vast majority of them innocent civilians. And the last time I saw the Cost of War project, which is out of, I think, is Brown University in the U.S., they estimated that the deaths caused by direct and indirect deaths caused by the United States in the Iraq War was approaching 1 million. And in Afghanistan, that number was close to 400,000. And the vast, vast majority of those deaths were of civilians. I've read articles where people, military members who had served in Afghanistan and in Iraq basically said, I felt like we were committing genocide, we were committing war crimes. It's just unconscionable that the people who orchestrated a war based on fabrication and lies would be able to get away with the mass murder of almost 1 million people in Iraq and 400,000 people in Afghanistan, and that the sorts of crimes that were committed at Abu Ghraib and other places are not going to be prosecuted.
Well, I think that's one of the main reasons the sanction was triggered against the Canadian judge is that she was one of the judges that resumed, I think, in 2022, the investigation of crimes in Afghanistan. And the fact is that Afghanistan at the time was a signatory and ratified it under the previous government. Now, the Taliban has said they're no longer a part of the ICC, but they're still covered for that period where they were a signatory and ratified it. And so that means that U.S. officials can be, or U.S. military or other participatory groups can be investigated and then named as criminals under that investigation. So this may come to a head because that investigation of Afghanistan is proceeding, even though Afghanis and U.S. Government officials both deny their jurisdiction. Other countries will be enforced to support that jurisdiction. So there may come a time if they find against U.S. military or etc. That they're in breach of these investigations and put on an arrest warrant for these individuals. It'll create quite a dilemma for another country to arrest an American citizen based on war crimes in another country. But I don't think that's happened yet.
No. And lost in all of this is the fact that Canadians can also be charged in those investigations. Canadians under, during the Chrétien administration, the Harper administration, when Canada still had boots on the ground in Afghanistan, and they had, there was a big controversy about Canadian soldiers transferring jurisdiction over Afghani prisoners to Americans. And then those prisoners were taken to, CIA sites or, these black site prisons where they were tortured. So Canada can be complicit in the crimes that these other people are charged for. Now, you don't see the Canadian government saying, "Oh yeah, well we're not going to accept that." Under Justin Trudeau, they consistently said that they support the work of the ICC, even though they, when the ICC issued arrest warrants for the Israeli leaders, they basically said we don't agree with that. But they didn't say we're not going to enforce it. They just said we don't agree with it, which I find to be disingenuous, because you can't say you support the international justice system and say that, oh no, well, if it goes against our political priorities, we're not going to agree with that, and essentially sort of run interference for the for those people or those countries that are supporters or allies. Like there's justice and there's no justice, and you can't basically say I'm for justice, but I'm not going to support justice against people who've committed war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are playing a strange political game there, and I mean it's a little bit similar to their position, I think, in the case brought about by South Africa and at the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which is called the World Court, and they brought a claim of genocide against Israel in that case, and Canada's been pretty not very outspoken in that case. What's that?
Well, they've been firmly against it. They don't believe they have come out and said, Canadian officials and Justin Trudeau came out and said they don't think this case has merit, which, frankly, I'm sorry, that's just a load of bullshit, because Amnesty International has come out and said Israel's committing genocide. Human Rights Watch,
Mm-hmm.
B'Tselem, the lead Israeli human rights organization, Physicians for, I think it's called Physicians for Justice Israel or something to that effect, came out, also said there's genocide is happening. The UN has come out and said genocide is happening, as has the International Association of Holocaust Scholars, that or genocide scholars, which represents every academic around the world that studies genocide and the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
And Israeli scholars like Raz Segal, Omar Bartov, Amos Goldberg, prominent in their field, they're Israeli Jews. They've come out and said that, among other Israelis who've come out and said that Israel's committing genocide. So when you've got all this overwhelming evidence, and not just the evidence that's already been collected, but the evidence that keeps continuing to be presented in terms of news reports, media reports, videos that are being posted by Israeli soldiers themselves of them committing war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide. The fact that Canada is still not on the right side of this really, makes me question their moral integrity. And for me, I think whether it's the government of Justin Trudeau before or now the government of Mark Carney, they've basically done nothing nothing substantive to stop the atrocities being committed. And of course, Canada has sold weapons to Israel. So Canada can also be charged as complicit in those crimes.
Yeah, it's interesting that Canada, who used to have a reputation as sort of being a peacekeeper and being a more liberal country, is now is. I mean, for the most part, they're not active in it, but they are very much on the fence and benefiting from staying on the sidelines and continuing to sell weapons, like you said. So it's disappointing to see Canada's not stepping up and playing that international role that they did much more in the past in terms of being against such atrocities and such injustices.
Well, you know what? Under criminal law in Canada, if you sell a weapon to someone who you know is going to out and kill somebody with that weapon, you can be charged as an accessory to murder
Mm-hmm.
or attempted murder.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. Israel is killing with impunity. The most recent official number of deaths put out by the Euromed Human Rights Monitor puts the Palestinian death toll at over 72,000 as of the end of August.
Mm-hmm.
Israeli academic Yaakov Garb had a study which he did based on data provided by the Israeli military. And this study was published by Harvard, which said the actual death toll could be somewhere between 377,000 to 400,000. So I mean that's the scale of these atrocities.
So why do
And
you
yet,
think? I mean, why do you think Canada is taking? I mean, when they're faced with such abundant evidence and so many groups that are recognizing this as a if not using the word genocide, then certainly crimes against
crimes against
humanity,
humanity. Yeah.
certainly that 100%. Then why are they not taking a stronger stance on this? Like, what do you think is their primary driver?
Well, I think two reasons. I think there's a very deep-seated racism against Palestinians in the government. It's been there for years. And also, basically, the Israel lobby has Canada by the nose. Anytime anybody comes out and says anything, negative about Israel or talks about genocide, well, you're anti-Semitic. That you hate Jews. That's why you're saying that. And there's a very visceral fear among political voices in this country, regardless of political stripe, of coming out and saying things that are critical of Israel, because there's
Mm-hmm.
a very, very strong pro-Israel lobby. There's and the thing is that Jews in Canada, in terms of voter bloc, are not large. They're probably less than 200,000.
Yeah, no,
But
they're not a big voter bloc, no, but it's the
no, they're not a
influence
big
they
one.
wield. Yeah.
But they wield immense power politically as well as financially, because they are big donors to both well, not all parties, but mainly to the Liberals and the Conservatives. So when I see the government and politicians act the way they do, I think three things: either they actually hate Palestinians, they're being blackmailed into behaving the way they do, or they
Well, I think you're missing two big factors that that are guiding it more than this. I don't think racism is the factor you think it is, because I think there's lots of other countries where there's different races where Canada will step up and make statements against what's going on there, because it doesn't interfere with our other interests. I think one of the
No,
biggest English
I
interests is
I'm specifically referring to anti-Palestinian racism,
okay.
not racism broadly, but racism directed at Palestinians, and also Islamophobia, given that over 90% of Palestinians are Muslim.
Well, I think that one of the big issues is just economic economic priorities. Like they they do sales to Israel, they do trade with Israel, and part of that is economic and relations with the U.S. So U.S. is supporting Israel, UK is supporting Israel, Canada wants to maintain good relations with its big trading partners. There's economic impacts to going against U.S. Much less so probably UK, but I think Canada's going to sort of go along with the majority there. They probably don't want to hurt those companies that are selling weapons or whatever. So it's just pure economic interests. And in terms of the whole racism aspect, I think a lot of people, when they do a deep dive analysis looking at Israel and Palestine, and this doesn't forgive what's going on, but it's like when people look at it, it's like some people call it simple, and a situation, whatever. Some people call it colonialization, whatever. But there's no simple answer to Palestine and Israel. Like even if Israel does the right thing, the conflict seems like it's going to continue. It's like there's no real resolution to the situation. So I think that's why sometimes Canadian politicians or even some other politicians are less likely to step in and take a position, because no position is going to help resolve the situation, it seems, based on both sides are intractable in terms of what they want as end goals.
Well, you've got Israel, who's violated over 40 UN General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. They're violating the Geneva Conventions. They're
But
violating the Hague.
so does Palestine. Palestine violates the same crimes against humanity. They attack civilians. They attack they attack people that are against them. They've killed their opposition. Like I think the Palestinians have done similar stuff, and they're just as vicious when they
Not on the
attack the
same
Jewish.
scale.
Not on the
Not
same
on,
scale, but
not on the same
only
scale.
because they don't have the power. If they had the
Yeah,
if Hamas had the power, they'd be doing the exact same things to the Jewish people that the Jewish people are doing to them.
and
Would they
that would be
not?
self-defense. Their land is being occupied under international law. Violence is allowed as a response to occupation, and the occupation of
Except
Palestinian
they don't
territory.
want. I mean, if they wanted a two-state solution where we each live in peace in our land, that would be a good argument. But they don't want that. They want one Palestine with Israel gone,
No,
just like
no,
Israel.
because that's actually incorrect. Because um, Yasser Arafat wanted to have a two-state solution, and he was working towards that. But Israel wanted to pretty much control
But he
everything.
never signed and agreed when he had a chance or an opportunity
Yeah,
to move
because
ahead.
what Israel was asking for in return for that was control of the borders, control of the airspace, a say over the resources, the water resources that was under Palestinian territory, and they were not willing to actually remove the settlers that had, where they had built settlements in occupied Palestine. So under those circumstances, like basically they're going to say, well, no, yeah, we want our state, but we're not going to do it where we basically are a colony of Israel. Not only that, they wanted a basically disarmed Palestinian state, which actually is ludicrous because no state is going to say we're not going to have a military defense force. So you look into these so-called agreements that were supposed to be the be all and end all of the conflict that had gone on for decades, and they
Yeah,
weren't.
I
They
mean,
appeared.
I can see those points there, but also, I mean, that doesn't jive with what's actually stated. So you're given one point in time where Arafat was willing to agree to X, Y, Z as long as Israel agreed to, ABC. But I mean, almost every other indication then, like, did you see that Ask Me project? I sent you that link. Did you look at any of those from that
Sorry,
YouTube
which
guy? There's a YouTube fella, and it's called the Ask Project, and he's actually from Ottawa apparently, or partly lives in Ottawa. I'm not sure where he lives full time now, but he spent a lot of time in Israel, so he's like, I don't know if he has any sort of Israeli citizenship or he just spends a lot of time there. And it seems that he works in the Tel Aviv University doing some sort of what do you call it, negotiation type teachings or whatever. But he goes around and he asks Palestinians and Israelis and Arab Israelis and etc. these different questions about what they see as peace and whatever. And people are incredibly forthcoming in their answers, which you wouldn't expect them to be in this very hot situation. But they're incredibly forthcoming. I've watched quite a few of them, and he's got a YouTube channel. He's been going since 2011, so he's got lots of videos that took place before October 7th as well, and the sentiments have not significantly changed. And a lot of people don't want a two-state solution on both sides. They think it won't work. Most of the Palestinians he interviews, assuming that he's not biased and he's not cutting out interviews that are against it, but most of the Palestinians interviews said all of Israel is occupied and they want basically all Palestinians to come back, which would, to me,
which is a lot, which is permissible under international law, because the right of return is entrenched international law of people who've been displaced because of war and occupation.
Yeah. I don't think that would ever, I don't think that's, I mean, maybe it's a reasonable thing, but I don't think it's I don't think it's feasible. I mean, it's certainly not going to happen, and I think it would basically wipe out Israel as a state. And I think that would be very, very, very hard. I can see the points on both sides, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like a reasonable thing. So, and there's many in Israel who just want one state of Israel, all of Israel, and eliminating Palestine. And then you've got tons of people on the Palestinian side who just want one state Palestine, with a majority Arabs in it. So I mean, neither they're mutually incompatible. Anyway, let's move on to some other chit chat.
Yeah. I mean, we could spend an entire hour or more talking about this one subject. Yes, I want to switch to what the issue that's been top of the news over the last few days, and that's the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a Trump ally, and head of a foundation that the Turning Point USA. He was a prominent voice in the MAGA movement, and he was assassinated while speaking at in front of a crowd at university, Utah Valley University in Utah. He was speaking, and a shot rang out. He was shot, and he died.
Yeah.
Now the suspected shooter, his name is well, I'm not going to mention his name because I don't like giving platform.
People can Google it.
Yeah, they can Google it if they want. Anyway, the 22-year-old shooter actually came from a MAGA family. This is the one thing that's not being mentioned among, in the social media universe, that this guy came from a MAGA family, who were very strong supporters of Donald Trump, and that apparently he had become very political and did not like the things that Charlie Kirk was saying, calling him fascist, according to news reports. Now, the thing is, I want to say this up front. This is out and out murder. It's unequivocally a crime. And the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, because it's not been proven in court, needs to be prosecuted, tried, and if found guilty, put in prison. However, we have to look at this in the broader context, because Charlie Kirk was no saint.
I don't think we have to look in the broader context, but I'd like to hear your points.
Well, yeah, in the broader context, Charlie Kirk was no saint. He was, as I said, he was a avid, supporter of Donald Trump and the MAGA message. He was anti-immigrant, anti-refugee. He was anti-LGBTQ. He was racist. And he even, despite saying he was a supporter of Israel, he delved into anti-Semitism, messages of anti-Semitism, saying a while ago that Jews control the news, the media, Hollywood, and a whole bunch of other, and banking and a whole bunch of other institutions. So, basically, he was not a nice guy. So
I
I
actually read some of that in his early days. He was pro-immigration, and white nationalists were going against him, which was probably a
oh
big part
really?
of his
I
supporter
I did
bases.
not read that.
Yeah,
I
like I
did
didn't do a
not read
deep
that.
dive in it, but I heard that in his early days, he was like, anti-abortion, pro-gun, like all the typical conservative things, but he
Yeah.
was pro-immigration and that the country needs immigration. And the white nationalists would show up at his rallies against him, and that was hurting him so much in his an endeavor to have those conservative white nationalists that he flipped on that one and took a different and tweaked his immigration stance. But anyway,
So
yeah.
basically, he was just in it for the money, and whatever message that gave him more followers and more money is the one that he would follow. I mean, that's what that's saying to me.
Well, I think most of the right wing people are in it for the money because I've seen lots of them, and like you look at someone like Megyn Kelly, who was always sort of right of center. She's just become more and more right supporting. Like you look at some of the stuff she says, and it used to be a little bit more track, and she's even fought with Trump and stuff in the past. But you look at her recent stuff, and she's like pro Trump, and she's like pro whatever, and like she called him a womanizer and all kinds of stuff in the past, and she had fights with him, and now she's like pro Trump, and now and then in other issues she's a lot more strong. Like, why does she take a big stance on, let's say, anti-trans issues or whatever? Like, that wasn't really her bailiwick before, but that becomes the right movement, and she jumps on the bandwagon. And I think that's 100%. A lot like a lot of other conservatives, their focus is on money and success. Like that's what the conservative agenda is, and individualism, and they do what they want to be successful. And you can sort of get
Well,
that to a certain degree, right? You're running a business, you're running a podcast, you're running an organization, and you find if I do X, just like Jordan Peterson, he started out with his specialty in terms of one issue where he didn't freedom of speech or whatever, and he probably felt passionate and knew a bit about, and he knew a bit about human psychology, but then he jumped on the right wing bandwagon, and now all of a sudden he's wealthy, he's a multimillionaire probably, and he's super popular, and he's just talking on every issue now because that is his success story.
well, basically, what that says to me, these are people who have no moral compass. They don't care the damage they do to society. They're pushing fascist messaging, which endangers minority communities. Whether it's Jordan Peterson, Megyn Kelly, or Charlie Kirk, they've pushed messaging that has endangered vulnerable and minority communities. And I can tell you that I'll bet that when the news broke, people in the LGBTQ2 community and certain immigrant communities, they weren't shedding any tears. All
No,
they
they
said,
weren't. No,
you
which
know,
is terrible, really, when you think about it. But I mean, at the same time, um, yeah, it's weird. Like you should never, I don't know, you should never be happy over someone getting shot in public like that. Like, it's terrible.
well, you know what? I mean, yeah, the way he died was awful. And I feel like I do feel for his wife and family who are grieving.
Yeah.
But tell me that since this has happened, that right wing fascist voices haven't picked it up as a reason to go after the left wing. I mean, Trump's head of propaganda and his key advisor Stephen Miller was talking about now we need to go after all the leftist groups, dismantle them, target those individuals. So basically, they're going to use this as
Yeah.
an excuse to amp up their fascist agenda.
Yeah.
So things are, and if that happens while the Utah governor is saying, let's take a breath, let's step back from the brink, you've got Trump and others and people around him basically saying, oh yeah, now this gives us an excuse to go after our enemies even more. So
That
the
is
what
a huge negative effect of that for sure. Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
almost like a what they call it, a false flag
yeah, false flag
situation.
upload.
Almost like they might have engineered it or allowed it to happen, just so
Well, I
they
mean,
which is crazy, but you never know.
you know, all I can see is that ever since the Trump political era began, um, things were
No,
bad.
assassinations have gone. I think it's probably been the worst number of attacks on politicians and public figures since the '60s,
Yeah,
when
it has.
JFK and
Yeah, yeah,
And
and we're not even
Martin Luther
talking about.
King were assassinated, like, and yeah,
Yeah, and aside from Charlie Kirk, who, as I said, was killed by a guy from a MAGA family.
yeah,
We're not even talking about the other things that have happened this year. The assassination of congressional representative from Minnesota, Melissa Hortman.
yeah, and her husband, I
Um,
think.
Senator Hoffman, yeah, so she and her husband were murdered in
Yeah.
their home once again by a Trump supporter.
Mm-hmm.
There was an attempted assassination of a senator,
Mm-hmm.
which was unsuccessful. There was the attempted kidnapping of Elizabeth Whitmer, who was the Michigan governor, which was foiled. There was the arson attack against the governor of Pennsylvania, where he and his family managed to escape. And all of these crimes were committed by, Trump and MAGA supporters. So, you know, what has happened is that as as Trump and his circle have continued to vilify, um, progressive voices, calling them radical, left wing thugs, communists and Marxists. There are, people within their movement have listened and said, well, we got to do something because, if we don't, then our whole way of life is going to go down the drain. And so, they're the ones who created this environment. And now that one of their own has been killed by also someone from, the MAGA family, they're now suddenly saying that this is all the fault of the progressive or left wing politicians and voices in society. And, I hate to say this, but I think that there's been a low grade civil war in the US now since Trump first came on the scene. And this may be the tipping point, because this may be the point now that one of their own has been killed that may
May
push.
not be a tipping point, but yeah, but it's certainly going to notch it up another level. And
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it hasn't. I mean, the U.S. predilection for violence didn't really start with Trump. I mean, there's been mass shootings and gun violence, etc., for a long time.
But not political violence, not targeting.
Not as much political violence. There's
Well,
always
not,
almost always been political violence to a certain degree in the U.S., but it's much higher now. It's been the highest it's
yeah,
been probably since the '60s.
yeah. I mean,
And
the last time this sort of thing happened was in the '60s with the JFK assassination, Malcolm X, uh, Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy. Um, the last time after that I remember a political assassination, I think, was Harvey Milk,
yeah,
who was a counselor in, I believe, San Francisco city councilor.
yeah.
I can't recall anything after that. Well, there was the attempt on Reagan's life when he
Attempt
was
on Reagan's
president.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, there was the attempt on Gerald Ford's life. But yeah, I mean, to the level that we've seen just recently, I don't think we've had that in generations.
No, that's true. Yeah. I do think though the general culture in the U.S. has made it easier because then I think when these fanatics do this, it's political, but it's not political in the sense that it's mental health issues. Like I don't think anyone goes out and does this without a certain level of mental health issues.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you think the assassination of JFK was related to mental health issues, or Martin Luther King Jr. or Bobby Kennedy? Or
Well, I think the
I
JFK one was probably some sort of
it was a political
staged thing,
assassination.
political. That one was probably political,
The
even
same
though
thing with,
the
I think,
official person was not.
yeah.
But
So, I mean, the Bobby Kennedy assassination, they pinned it on Sirhan, but there have been questions ever since he was convicted and jailed that he was a Manchurian candidate. Basically, he was brainwashed into doing it.
all the
Uh,
recent ones, now I don't know about the current one, but all the recent ones, all the perpetrators I think had a lot of mental health issues, right? Like so I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I think there's two issues that cause issues in the States like this, which makes it doesn't cause political violence, but it makes it a lot more easier. And I think one of them is their infatuation with guns that they have. So
oh yeah, well
this
that
Wild
definitely makes.
West. I mean, that's a big. If they didn't have that infatuation of guns, you wouldn't have all these political. You wouldn't have as many political cases because that Wild West mentality, the infatuation with guns, creates that whole society that feels that. And that combined with the other big issue in the States is the individualism. Americans consider themselves individualists, not part of society, not part of I mean, they're nationalists, but at the same time they're individualists, and they consider the individual's rights outweigh societal rights in a lot of ways, which I think basically erodes societal cohesion. So basically,
There,
the
I
issue
agree with
is
totally agree with you.
that they're not into building their community and building bridges. They're into, I mean, they're into doing that to the extent it doesn't hamper individual rights at all, which is
Or
why,
they're
yeah,
doing that to the extent that it helps their own individual ambitions. So
yes,
if it doesn't help them survive or not survive, but to succeed, then they're not going to do it.
I mean,
And
some of
I
some of
agree with you.
I mean, it does a lot. This individualism. I think. I mean, it hurts societies. It makes a challenge for them to get together on collective measures to do things to actually move towards benefiting society. Like everyone's focused on individualism. A lot of people there's an insane worship of wealth in the U.S. And if someone
Yeah,
can get wealthy by hurting or screwing a bunch of other people, that seems totally acceptable to a large portion. I mean, not all of them. I mean, there's a lot of really, of course, half the population or a third of the population, whatever, are very good community serving, people that are really focused on good ethics and good whatever. But there's that individualization, and that also drives the polarization in the states. I think they're polarized because their individual goals and wishes are you see that in the media. That's why the media is so polarized and becoming more polarized, is because it's all about the individual, not about the society. It's all about what I want and what my group wants, and not about what's best for society.
and I think that's another box ticked on the road to possibly
Yeah,
a civil war in the U.S. Because if people don't see their own interests being advanced, then they'll say, "Well, my interests aren't advancing because of this, that, or the other thing, or these people or that people who are diminishing the family or diminishing society or who are anti-American." Because that's the other thing that comes up, is that when people are critical of the government for violating rights or committing crimes, well, you just hate America. That's not,
yeah,
like, that's the response. No, and for us as Canadians, we're watching this, but the thing is that mentality seeps into some of our Canadian
it
politics,
does. Yeah,
and
yeah,
we've seen some of that through the Maple MAGA Canadians. I can't believe that there was a poll done back in January, February, um, where it was asked whether, like, after Trump started talking about annexing Canada, that a poll was done. It said 90% of Canadians opposed it. But I can't believe that as many as 1 in 10 Canadians actually are supporting Canada being part of the U.S. And this is a Trump mentality, to say that Canada should be part of the U.S. and like, all the U.S. sees us as is a lackey and a source for all kinds of resources which are critical to their industries.
hmm No, that's very disturbing. Whenever I see even a single Canadian considering that it would be better for us to join the U.S., it's very disturbing.
Yeah, and that brings us back to, for example, Charlie Kirk was, as a gung ho Trump supporter, he supported Trump's calls for Canada to be annexed.
hmm
So you know what? You know, it's tragic the way he died. Would have been better if he died of natural causes. But the fact that his voice is no longer out there pushing these very hateful narratives, I'm not going to lose sleep over the fact that he's gone.
I mean, he was a huge supporter of Trump, and I mean, I think Trump and his party actually credit him with helping them win the election. So I mean, he
Oh yeah.
was a huge factor,
Well,
which is another reason why it may make the right wing's reaction a lot stronger, and hopefully it'll get calmed down before anything extreme happens.
well, it makes me wonder what would have happened if that shooter who took a shot at Trump during that rally before the election,
Yeah,
what if he hadn't missed?
yeah,
What would that have meant for the the MAGA movement in the U.S. Would suddenly, there have been, people running around with guns, right-wing MAGA people running around with guns, going after the Democrats, or,
Yeah.
um,
It's
like it makes you
interesting
wonder.
though. I mean, there would have been a reaction, of course, but at the same time, and it might have probably would have been a certain amount of violence, but at the same time, the MAGA movement is a cult of Trump, so the cult would have died because they didn't have another personality to replace him, right? So
Actually, I don't think it would have
you don't
died
think it would have?
because,
Yeah, you think
no, I
someone
think,
else would have stepped in and taken his
I
place?
mean, JD Vance was, there as
Yeah,
his running mate, and JD Vance in some ways is more vociferous in pushing the MAGA agenda than Trump. I mean, Trump now, there's discussions about maybe senility is setting in, and that
yeah. There's lots
he's
of
actually
rumors about
not
health
fit.
issues now. They've not seen him as much, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And then when he talks, like he talks in very, very simple language and simple terms. I mean, not that he didn't do that before, but
yeah,
it seems like there's all these threads of thoughts in his head, and whichever one he latches onto, he goes in
yeah,
that direction.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that the MAGA movement is very much in some ways like the Nazi movement in Germany in the 1930s, and if their leader dies, there's someone waiting to step into his shoes and lead it. And they may not have the same level of affinity for the new leader, but the fact that the new leader is pushing the messaging that they support, they'll go along with it.
Hmm.
I'd like to switch to another topic, which is also, a shocking issue in the news recently, and that's Israel's attack on Qatar, where Israel attacked a meeting that was discussing peace options, where the Hamas leaders are situated in Qatar,
Yeah, that was
and
surprising. Yeah,
it was well, actually, in some ways it isn't, because Israel has attacked 7 countries since October 2023. It's attacked Lebanon, where it did a large bombing campaign. It's bombed Syria. It bombed Yemen. It bombed Iraq. It bombed Iran, and now Qatar, which was a neutral country trying to seek peace between Israel and Hamas. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, it's another um, indication, another piece of evidence that shows that Israel is a rogue terrorist state who believes that it's above international law, because they didn't care that they were breaking international law when they attacked a country that had not attacked them, right? The
yeah.
fact that the fact that Qatar was hosting this meeting is not even, it's the fact that they breached the sovereignty of another nation, and they attacked something that was happening in the country. And not only that, but this bombing took place in a residential area, which had the potential for hundreds of civilians to be killed. So
I
Israel
think.
didn't really care.
I mean, I think it's more significant because I don't think Israel's ever attacked Qatar before. They've attacked all these other countries before, and I think
Well, they
they
never
also.
attacked Iran until recently.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, at
Um, but most of the other countries they have attacked before, and they have been in
some point. Yeah,
conflict
yeah.
with before, and so this one's and it's particularly concerning because I think it's understood by that Israel and the U.S. knew and were okay with these leaders of Hamas being in Qatar, and sort of a unwritten accept it, and there wasn't any sort of declaration that they shouldn't be hosting these, or they would consider hosting them an act of war or what have you. So it shows
Well, I mean,
I mean it shows an interesting lack of respect for law by Israel, certainly. And
well,
they
that's
have that
certainly.
anyway because they haven't signed the Rome Statute, they have no interest in international law, etc. So they do what they want. But it's
Well, I mean,
surprising because Qatar is sorry, go ahead.
no. Well, I mean, they've been violating international law for decades.
Mm-hmm.
40
Yeah,
UN resolutions that they have ignored, right?
yeah,
The Geneva Conventions, which they are part of and which they have signed, which they have ignored, the Hague Conventions.
yeah,
So, humanitarian law, the fact that they are, at this very moment violating the Genocide Convention.
yeah.
So,
But it's also interesting that they did this because Qatar is, I mean, there's a U.S. base on Qatar, and And apparently, I mean, the U.S. must have blessed this. I can't see Israel doing this without the U.S. allowing it. I think the official news is they were notified somewhat before, but only shortly before.
Not
I
even
suspect.
before, actually. It wasn't before the attack took place. The U.S. apparently was told that Israel is bombing the senior military officials, and they passed the news on while the bombs were dropping.
Okay. But I think they might have known a bit before themselves, and they just passed it on to Qatar once the bombs were already about to drop or dropping.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And of course, the U.S. claimed no knowledge, but there's no way that such a military operation takes place, as you said, without knowledge of the U.S.
yeah, I can't see the U.S. not being well aware of it, and they must be monitoring that area quite a bit. Like I can't imagine they wouldn't be monitoring, be well aware of what's going on, and but maybe they
Yeah.
don't. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the U.S. like given the military assets in the region, the
Yeah,
U.S. constantly has radar planes up in the air, making sure that their assets are secure. So there's no way they would not have known that these jets were on their way
on the way to
to
Qatar. Yeah,
Qatar.
yeah,
Yeah, they would. There's no way they would not have known.
yeah,
Um, and the fact that they let it happen, the fact that they let it happen, shows that the U.S. is just as complicit in Israeli crimes as as Israel is,
yeah.
because and not only that, but these attacks took place using American weapons,
Hmm.
American or weapons that the U.S. sold to Israel, and there are provisions in under these sales agreements that American weapons are not used to attack allies,
Yeah,
and Qatar is an ally. So we'll see what happens, because apparently this issue has been bought before both the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Um, Qatar has said that there will be some sort of retaliation, whether it'll be in the form of military action or not remains to be seen. I think the least that will happen is that maybe Qatar will ask the heads of these two organizations, that those countries that do have diplomatic relations with Israel, to pull out their ambassadors, which is a very strong diplomatic statement. And the ones that are doing business with Israel, maybe ask them to suspend trade with Israel. So we'll see what happens.
hmm.
Uh,
You said
but
that you thought they were it was an illegal attack on Qatar.
yeah, well, it was an illegal attack. Qatar hadn't attacked. Like, if it was retaliation to what?
I'm just trying to think. They're supporting Hamas leaders, so would
No,
not
they're
that be
hosting Hamas
considered?
leaders. They're trying to negotiate a peace treaty, and they've been trying to negotiate peace since the genocide began. So
Yeah, but the Hamas leaders were there long before the October 7th attack. Hamas leaders have been there
yeah, but
for
that's not
decades, haven't they?
justification. I mean, that's like that would be the U.S. saying that, we're going to go bomb the Russian embassies all across Europe because because Russia is invading Ukraine. Um, you know, like, it's a violation
It's
of
not an
international.
embassy though. An embassy is different, right? Because usually they expel diplomats, so they sort of agree to. When you have an embassy, you're agreeing to host those people, and if you don't, if you're going to wipe out that agreement, then you expel them. You
Okay,
don't.
well,
Yeah,
let's say it's a
yeah.
Russian business that's located in another country. If the U.S. went and attacked that, that would be a violation of the sovereignty of that country, and it would be a violation of international law. So, basically, Israel behaves as if it doesn't. It behaves as a
Yeah.
thug, as a rogue
I mean,
terrorist
I don't
state.
think it was a good idea, but to me, it always seemed weird that Hamas is living in comfort in Qatar, free from being able to be touched by Israel. To me, if you're hosting a terrorist organization, then like openly, then you're basically committing an act of war on another country. Like,
Well, what you call
yeah,
a terrorist organizations, Palestinians call, a band of freedom fighters.
they do,
Um,
yeah. But it's still
yes,
a terrorist organization, just like Israel is a terrorist organization if they're targeting civilians, really.
yeah. Well, I mean, Israel
Yeah.
is a terror. The Israeli military is definitely a
I
terrorist
mean, the only
organization.
difference between a terrorist organization and a militarism, basically a military that's attacking, civilians or whatever, is that one is controlled by a legitimate government, and one is not, in a sense, right?
Yeah. Well,
So I mean, Hamas is basically any sort of combat that Hamas does is a terrorist action in the sense because they're not a separate state right now. So anything they
well,
do is a
even
terrorist.
if they were a
Yeah.
separate state, I mean, like look at what they've done with Iran and the military guard, the Revolutionary Guard, which is an arm of the Iranian military. A number of countries have labeled it a terrorist organization. So it doesn't really matter. Like in the eyes of the West, they'll call a group of terrorists as long as it is in line with their own political agendas. So,
There is
um,
that, yeah. But at the same
so
time, to me, an organization that targets civilians and their target is to invict terror, not to get military gain, is a terrorist organization. I mean, by definition. Now you
well,
can
that would
say
also
you're
that
okay with
would make
terrorism. You can say you're
the
okay with
entire
terrorism, but it's still
no.
terrorist action, right? So,
Well, then that would make the U.S. military a terrorist organization as well as the Russian military, the
well,
Chinese.
well, it would, but except that's militarism versus when a state's doing it, it's a military authoritarian action, or legal action maybe, but it's not an act of terrorism. Like terror itself is a small group sort of without power trying to gain influence through terror by attacking civilians.
Well, no,
Yeah,
terrorism. The definition of terrorism is, attacks meant to achieve a political goal.
yeah,
And so one could say that when Israel attacked Iran, their nuclear facilities, that was supported by the U.S. That would make both the U.S. And Israel terrorist organizations.
yeah.
When
I mean, I think attacking their nuclear facilities, in a sense, is a terrorist organization because then they're attacking another country for their. But it's not political goals in the sense that they're trying to take away
well,
their nuclear. But
no,
anyway,
but the political goal was to try and weaken Iran and possibly, hopefully, um, give support to um, you know, um, anti-Iranian
yeah,
elements within the Iranian population.
yeah,
Um, when when China, you know, creates this concentration camp infrastructure in the Northwest region, rounds up Uyghurs, um, violates the Genocide Convention. There's apparently
mm-hmm,
2 million Uyghurs sitting in concentration camps. Steals their kids to indoctrinate them into Chinese communist ideology. For me, that's government actions to achieve a political goal.
mm-hmm,
I would see that as terrorism as well.
yeah,
But if you want to look at the actions that Israel has taken, basically, since its inception, its political goal has been to ethnically cleanse
yeah,
all of the territory that it controls of Palestinians.
yeah,
That is the political goal, which makes Israel a terrorist state and a terrorist organization. But the thing is, we look at the whole issue of who is a terrorist and who is not a terrorist through the lens of Western politics. Canada just recently this year declared a group called the Samidoun Palestinian Prisoner Network, which is an advocacy organization. They declared it a terrorist group under Canadian law, which is absolute crap because that would mean that, any organization lobbying, and this is what this group did, lobbying to achieve a political goal, would be considered terrorist. That would make First Nations groups that are trying to, protect their lands terrorist organizations if you use those sorts of rules. There's an organization in the UK called Palestinian Action, which was a very strong Palestinian advocacy group, and it was put on the terrorist list.
yeah,
And now, even holding a sign up saying "I support Palestinian Action" puts people in jail. There's been, ever since they did this in the UK, there have been protests with seniors, even people in wheelchairs holding up, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestinian Action," and those people have been jailed.
yeah.
So, you know, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
I think they went too far, but I understand the logic behind that because that group, Palestinian Action, was doing illegal activities to, like, break into factories, stop production, that sort of thing. So it was a group or a loosely based group or a network of people that were focused on illegal acts under the country, like maybe ethical, maybe virtual acts. But then again, I don't think that makes them terrorists because
No.
they weren't attacking the political regime. They weren't trying to change. They were basically protesting what they thought was ethical things or whatever. So label them as an illegal group is one thing. Label them as terrorists is something else altogether.
Well, I mean, you know what? Like
Yeah.
you and I, when we talk about a lot of different stuff,
Yeah.
and sometimes what we talk about goes against the mainstream thinking on politics. And if some official in the government, listened to our podcast and said, well, no, when they were talking about this, they were actually supporting terrorism. So these two guys are terrorists, right? And
Yeah.
yet what we do is we actually talk. We don't go out and take violent action against anything. And
Yeah.
yet if someone decided that we were terrorists, we would suddenly become terrorists.
Yeah. No, it's true. That's why the Palestinian action one went too far because those are people just protesting. Um,
So same thing with Sami doing
yeah.
Palestinian Network, Prisoner Network. This started out as a group to support people who had been abducted by Israel, held in Israeli prisons
Yeah.
without charge for months or years at
Yeah.
some time, including children. This is what they'd been doing for years. Of course, they've been very active in advocating against Israel on the genocide in Gaza. And I'd love to know the logic behind someone telling within the Canadian government saying, "Well, this group is actually a terrorist group, and we need to put it on the terrorist list."
That one's a bit tough though because if you have a group and I think it would apply to both people groups supporting Hamas or groups supporting um, Israel, groups supporting Palestine or groups supporting Israel. If they're supporting their agenda, it's a pretty gray line between supporting the group or the people and supporting illegal activities. Like if you're supporting Israel, like you said yourself, if you're supporting Israel, then you're supporting a genocidal action. But does
Yeah,
not the same apply to Hamas? Any group that supports Palestine is supporting terrorist actions. Could you not make the same argument?
no, because under international law, people who are occupied are allowed to use violence to try and resist their oppressors. Whereas Israel is actually the occupying power. It's supposed to have, it's supposed to abide by international laws, including the Geneva Conventions, in terms of how it treats the occupied population. Yet they've ignored
They're
their
allowed to
people.
resist their oppressors, but they're not allowed to breach humanitarian rules, same laws that Israel is bound by, in order to resist their oppressors. Like resistance probably means, I don't know, damaging facilities, attacking soldiers, attacking military facilities. I don't think resistance means killing civilians. At least
Well,
not in legal frameworks, not in humanitarian
well, if
law.
those civilians are occupying your territory, what if those civilians are occupying your territory? Then they become legitimate targets.
Well, that would be the argument for Palestinian. Israel could make the same thing. Oh, those Palestinians are occupying my territory, so I'm gonna like. I mean, that's a ridiculous argument,
Yeah,
but
but where are Palestinians occupying Israeli territory? Where?
well, where is Israelis occupying Palestinian territory? I mean, you can
In
make
the
the
West
same.
Bank.
Except the Israelis make the argument that I don't agree with it, but I mean, they make the argument that it's Palestine's not a state and that that's really part of Israel. Although they don't really treat it like Israel because they don't give those people any rights. So it's a catch 22. Either it's part of Israel or not. If it's part of Israel, they should make them all citizens and give them the vote. But they
Yeah,
want them
which
half
they
in and
will
half
never
out.
do.
But what's that? What they never do
They'll never do
because
that.
they'll never do that. So, but effectively to me, there is one state of Palestine with is like legally, even though the countries will recognize it as separately. Like right now, you've never had really a separate Palestine state on its own. Basically, it's always been part of Israel separated into an occupied territory. It was like South Africa with, Lesotho and the other territory there. It was part of the
Pakistan.
state, but it was really just occupied by South Africa. They were never a separate state or whatever. And Palestine is sort of on the verge of becoming a separate state, and they're somewhat recognized, but they're not a fully separate state,
Well,
and they
they're
haven't
not.
been.
they're not
Yeah.
just somewhat recognized. They're recognized by 152 nations around the world as a state.
Yeah.
They're not full members of the UN,
They're not full
but they
members
do
yet.
have
Yeah.
they do have provisional membership at the UN.
Yeah.
They have delegations, or what we would call them, normally would be embassies, but they have delegations in all kinds of countries around the world.
Yeah.
So they have the trappings of being a state. The only thing they don't have is a state that they control, completely on their own,
Yeah.
because their state is occupied, or in the case of Gaza, it's been under siege, for decades. So anyway, I think we're probably going to be seeing more. We'll have more opportunities to talk about this, because what's happening in Gaza is not going to end anytime soon. I
No.
wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if Israel decides to, bomb another country, because it, suits their political agenda. And we'll wait to see what happens with the meeting of the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in response to the attack in Qatar.
Yeah. I mean, I am sort of, optimistic over the fact that ICC and ICJ, like the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, are proceeding, and they are naming people, and they are investigating these atrocities. And that's only really started, following 1998, and people have been arrested and jailed in the past, previous dictators and previous breachers of ICC and of international law and humanitarian rights. And it'd be interesting to see, like, I mean, there could be a future where Netanyahu gets out of power and the next Israeli officials decide to cut tie and put him out to dry, and he gets charged for these genocides. I mean, that
Yeah,
could
but
easily
he's not
happen,
the
right?
only
So
one, though.
he's
You
not the
see,
only one, no.
like the entire Israeli
Yeah.
cabinet, the entire leadership of the Israeli military needs to be
I don't think they'll
charged.
go after them. If they go after a few, it'll be enough to set an example, I think, that don't do this again, sort of thing, to put the fear in them. But who
Well,
knows? Maybe
I,
they'll go after a lot more. I don't know.
it remains to be seen.
Yeah.
What I want to see in Canada, there have been Canadians who have traveled to Israel to sign up with the Israeli military to participate in what's going on
Yeah.
in Gaza, and they've come back. They committed war crimes and
Yeah,
crimes against
some of them
humanity.
fear that they will be prosecuted for that eventually, in
Well,
Canada
you know
or
what? Then
otherwise. Yeah.
you shouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have
Exactly.
done it.
Yeah.
Because it's not as if like they were already at the start of this in the fall of 2023. It's not as if there hadn't already been
Lots of
very
reports of
knowledgeable
atrocities. Yeah.
voices saying that genocide was being committed. So you've
And
heard
I don't know if like going there and fighting, would that automatically make you a participant, or do you actually have to commit those atrocities yourself?
well, if you're in let me use this example.
Yeah.
So back in after World War II, when the Nuremberg trials were underway, in addition to the military leaders and the political leaders that were in the docks at Nuremberg, there was also the heads of media organizations from Nazi Germany. And I think his name was Julius Streicher, if I remember the name correctly. He was one of the biggest newspaper owners in Germany. And he was tried at Nuremberg, and he was convicted, and he was executed. So if that is the example that we're using, then basically anybody who was participating in what was happening, what was done to Palestinians, whether they actually shot somebody, dropped a bomb from an airplane, or participated in blocking humanitarian aid, which ended up
Yeah.
in the deaths, the starvation and famine deaths of Palestinians, they are complicit. They committed a crime, and they need to be charged. They need to be tried, and hopefully convicted of participating in crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. So, but I think that's something that we need to have a longer conversation on, because the RCMP is investigating certain
Yes.
Canadians. So,
Okay. So let's wrap it up there. That's it for
yep.
today. Thanks for listening, and you'll hear from us again in next week.